The road stretched endlessly through the dark forest, swallowed by towering trees on either side. It wasn't on any map, and yet, here it was. A town whispered about in hushed voices, mentioned in campfire stories, a place that existed only for those unlucky enough to stumble upon it. The few who did never returned. The only proof of its existence? Distorted 911 calls that shouldn't have been possible. The last known recording came from a girl, her voice trembling, breathless and broken. "Please, send help. It won't let us leave." A sharp screech, a gasp, and then static. No further trace of the caller, no record of the town's location, just another mystery buried beneath time, waiting for its next victims. They hadn't planned on finding Cold Hollow. It wasn't on their itinerary. Ethan gripped the wheel, frowning at the flickering GPS screen. "This isn't right," he muttered, glancing at Sam in the passenger seat. Lila and Marcus were in the back, their laughter fading as the road stretched further into nothingness. The trees lining the road felt off. They weren't just still, they were unnaturally rigid, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing against them like an unseen force. The GPS died, the screen flickering once before going black. No signal, no service, just silence. A rusted sign loomed ahead, half hidden by vines. The paint faded, but still legible. "Welcome to Cold Hollow." Pop. The town stood frozen in time. Storefronts with peeling paint, houses with doors ajar, their dark interiors yawning like gaping mouths. Yet, lights flickered inside the windows, as if waiting for someone, as if watching. Ethan killed the engine, and the silence swallowed them whole. No wind, no rustling leaves, just an eerie stillness that made every breath feel deafening. A single neon sign buzzed weakly in the distance, the only sign of life. "A diner?" Lila whispered, staring at the dimly lit building on the corner. The word "open" flickered unevenly, barely holding on to life. "Maybe they have directions," she suggested, already unbuckling her seatbelt. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, but where would they go? The road behind them had become nothing but thick fog, swallowing any sign of an exit. With no other choice, they stepped out of the car, their footsteps crunching against gravel. The air smelled stale, like something old, something decaying. Inside the diner, an old man stood behind the counter. His eyes were wide, his skin pale. He didn't greet them, didn't smile, just stared. Hey," Marcus said, his voice forced, breaking the suffocating silence. "Can you tell us where we are? Our GPS cut out." The man didn't blink, didn't move. Instead, he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "You shouldn't be here." His hands trembled as he gripped the counter. "Leave, before it wakes up." Ethan's stomach dropped. Before what wakes up? The bell above the diner door jingled. A stranger entered. Tall, unnaturally tall. His clothes were tattered, soaked in something dark. His face hidden beneath a hood, yet they could feel his eyes, cold, calculating, boring into them. The old man stiffened, his already pale skin turning ghostly white. "It's too late now," he muttered. The lights flickered, the shadows outside shifted. Something was moving, and it was watching them. The air outside the diner felt colder, heavier, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The friends walked in silence, their footsteps echoing through the empty streets. It was only then that they noticed. There were people inside the houses, but they didn't move. A woman stood in her kitchen, her back to them, staring at the wall. Not cooking, not doing anything, just standing. A man sat in a rocking chair on his porch, the chair creaking rhythmically, but his hollow eyes never blinked, never looked away. The feeling of being watched crawled up Lila's spine, her voice barely above a whisper. Something is wrong with this place. The whispering started then, faint, indistinct voices circling them, pressing against their ears, but there was no one around, no mouths moving, no lips forming words, just the sound, slithering through the air. Ethan tried to retrace their steps, but the streets had changed. The road they had come from no longer existed. The turns they took twisted and led them back to where they started, an endless loop pulling them deeper into Cold Hollow. Marcus cursed under his breath, his pulse hammering. "This isn't real, it can't be real," Ethan gritted his teeth. "Then why can't we leave?" He turned toward the forest. Maybe they could cut through the trees, but just as they started toward it, Marcus stopped, his breath catching in his throat. A message was scrawled across the brick wall of an old building, the words smeared in something dark. "You can't leave until it chooses you." Then, in the distance, a sound rose through the silence, a slow, deep chime, a church bell ringing. But there was no church. Not in this town. The ground shuddered beneath them, a tremor so deep it vibrated through their bones. The air changed. The stale silence shattered as every house in town suddenly came to life. The people inside finally moved, but something was wrong, horribly wrong. Their heads snapped to unnatural angles, necks twisting like broken dolls. Their mouths stretched too wide, too far, curving into unnatural grins. Their fingers, stiff and elongated, tapped against the glass of their windows in unison, a slow, deliberate rhythm that sent ice through Ethan's veins. Lila let out a sharp gasp, her breath hitching as she pointed. "It's him!" The hooded figure from the diner now stood in the middle of the street. But he was taller, much taller. His body stretched unnaturally, his arms longer, fingers curling toward the ground. The air around him shimmered as if the town itself bent to his presence. The friends barely had time to react before he moved. Not walked. Shifted. 1 second he was standing still, the next he was closer, towering over them like a shadow cast from nowhere. "We need to get out of here, now!" They turned and ran for the car, but before they reached it, they stopped short. The tires slashed. Every single one. As if something knew they would try to escape. Ethan turned to yell, but his voice caught in his throat. The buildings were changing, the windows, the doors. They weren't just openings anymore, they were mouths, wide, gaping, stretching open like hungry voids. The sky above them darkened, pulsing as if it were alive. The town wasn't just trapping them, it was consuming them. Sam tripped, his scream cut short as something yanked his leg. The ground beneath him was no longer solid. It moved, twisted. Fingers of shadow wrapped around his ankles, pulling him down as if the earth itself had hands. Ethan lunged, grabbing his arm and yanking him free. But when Sam looked up, his eyes were wrong. Black, empty. A twisted grin spread across his lips, and when he spoke, his voice was no longer his own. You were chosen. Ethan, Lila, and Marcus knew they had one chance to escape. The town wasn't letting them go, but they weren't about to sit and wait to be swallowed whole. The general store stood eerily silent, its door hanging open as if inviting them in. Inside, dust covered the shelves, the air thick with the scent of something rotten. Lila's trembling hands brushed against an old yellowed map pinned to the counter. It showed the entire town, but only one exit. The graveyard. Ethan grabbed the map. This is it. We go now. They burst out of the store, sprinting toward the graveyard as the ground trembled beneath them. Then the earth cracked open. Hands, dozens of them, shot up from the dirt, clawing at their legs, bony fingers wrapping around their ankles, pulling. The town was awake now, and it was hungry. The townspeople emerged from the houses, their bodies stiff, heads tilting too far, grins stretching impossibly wide. They walked toward them, jerky and unnatural, as if they weren't in control of their own limbs. The hooded figure rose above them, levitating, his voice an ancient whisper that bled into the sky itself. The clouds churned red, the air turned thick and suffocating. "Run!" Marcus bellowed, tearing away from the grasping hands, dragging Lila along. Ethan was right behind them. The graveyard loomed ahead, the iron gate creaking open on its own. Inside, broken headstones littered the ground, except one. One stood pristine, untouched by time. Ethan slowed, eyes locked onto the freshly carved name. Ethan Mitchell arrived 2024, never left. A cold shiver crawled up his spine. No, this isn't real, he gasped. Then the ground beneath him caved in. He screamed, clawing at the dirt as it swallowed him, the soil turning to liquid shadow, pulling him down inch by inch. Lila and Marcus lunged, gripping his arms, but it was useless. The town had chosen. His fingers slipped through theirs, his mouth open in a final, soundless scream as the earth sealed itself shut. Ethan was gone. The sun rose, casting golden light over Cold Hollow. The town looked different now, normal. The houses, the roads, the empty streets. It could have been any small town in America. Lila and Marcus sat in their car, staring blankly ahead. There was no panic, no horror in their eyes. Just emptiness they didn't remember. Ethan Mitchell had never existed. Inside the diner, the old man wiped the counter, humming a slow, tuneless song. The neon sign buzzed softly in the morning air. Outside, another car pulled into town, two new travelers stepping out, looking around in confusion. "We weren't supposed to be here," one of them muttered. On the edge of town, the wooden welcome sign stood proud. The paint looked fresh, as if someone had just touched it up. But there was something new about it. Below the words, "Welcome to Cold Hollow, Pop," a new face had been added, Ethan Mitchell. His eyes followed the road. His mouth was smiling. Would you visit a town like this, and what would you do if you couldn't leave? Let us know in the comments below. And make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because you never know what's waiting for you in the dark.